This is the last lesson that I have scheduled regarding the creation evolution controversy and the creation evolution issue. And in this lesson, I'm taking it in just a little bit different direction, speaking about astrology versus astronomy. And we'll see in the lesson, there's a couple of points of intersect between both of them, and we'll see how they had been connected or why they had been connected in the ancient, long ago past. So we're taking it in a different direction. We have several other lessons that I had planned to do on this particular series, but I thought this would probably be sufficient. This is the seventh and the last in this series. So by way of introduction, I want you to think about this article that I read in The Economist just the other day. And in The Economist, which was online, and it was published in the fall of 2024, just a few months ago. And it pointed out that astrology is absolutely growing by leaps and bounds in this country, and that it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. 10 years ago, 2013, it tells us that there was about $13 billion that came in through astrology, but now it's going to be over $21 billion by 2031. It is absolutely growing exponentially, and the question is, in The Economist, as well as many other articles now, why is astrology growing so greatly and so voluminously in our country? How is that the case? The answers to that perhaps are multiple and varied. One of them that is given to us by the American Psychological Association is that people are very stressed anymore, particularly the Generation X and the millennials. They're all very stressed about what's going on in our country and what's happening in the world. That may be true that people are stressed, but people have always been stressed, haven't they, regarding things back in the Depression years and going back further than that. People have always been stressed. And I don't believe that really plumbs the depth of the answer as to why people are turning to astrology. In my view, one of the reasons, and probably the primary reason, is because that our mainstream culture has repudiated God and the Bible, and there's nothing else to which people can turn as far as finding guidance in their lives than in the corners of astrology. But be that as it may, astrology has now taken over many markets in, for example, major businesses and corporations. HR departments, for example, have actually job hirings based upon astrological charts, some of them. Some of them even have predictions of growth, that is their business growth and their profit margins based upon astrology or astrological predictions. All of this and more also is really alarming to those who are Christian people who want to follow the Bible and asking the question, how is it the case that astrology has become so much a major market in the world today? So let's think about that particular for just a few moments, and I have 3 points particularly. Number one, what is astrology exactly? What is astrology? Not just simply the horoscope, but there's much more to it. What is astrology? Then we'll notice, number 2, the history of astrology, just in brief, what the history of astrology has been. And then number 3, what is and should be the Christian response to astrology. So let's think about those 3 areas. What is astrology, first of all? Astrology is, according to the word, is aster, means star, and logos is the study of. So you can see immediately, reaching back into ancient times, how astrology and astronomy had been confused together and even thought as one particular unit. However, astronomy is a legitimate scientific field that studies the heavens, mathematical calculations, scientific calculations. But astrology has taken a different turn from ancient times on and really is a different variety completely regarding the stars and star maps and heavenly bodies, the sun, moon, and so forth, and the planets. And astrology is actually an occultish practice. Occult is defined as hidden, dark meanings, finding dark and hidden meanings in the world. And it is the idea that we can guide our lives, or that our lives are guided by the astronomical bodies in the heavens. That somehow our lives are guided by the position of the heavenly bodies, whether it be the planets, the constellations, the different stars. All of these and more also show us that people believe that our lives are actually guided by what the heavenly bodies, the positions that they're in. And there are many different branches of it. As a matter of fact, there might be what we might call Vedic astronomy that comes out of India. There is natal astronomy, that is the month in which you were born and what the constellation was at that particular time, whether Taurus, the bull, or Aries, the ram, and so forth. There's natal astrology. There are other areas of astrology, such as uranium astrology, which is the idea that not the planets in position, but between the planets, they somehow influence our lives and influence what we are doing. One of the interesting elements of it is this. This is according to a book written by John West several years ago, and he talks about, he's defending astrology, and he tells us that astrology really limits the idea of free will. As a matter of fact, he puts it this way: free will is an illusion. It's an illusion for man. Now right here, you can feel the intersection of this with the evolutionary theory that we have reviewed in the last 6 lessons. Remember William Provine, the biologist who came to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville several years ago? We mentioned him. Exactly in 1998, he stood up and spoke and said, you know what, the world of evolution, these are some of the basic principles, and that is, number 1, no gods worth having exist. Number 2, he said there is no such thing as life after death. There's number 3, there is no ultimate guide for morality. None whatsoever. There's nothing ultimately, absolutely right or wrong. He said all of these are accepted by the world of evolution and biologists in our university systems, so much so I'm not even going to spend time arguing them. But he said, I am going to argue with you and talk to you about the fact that there's no free will among mankind. No free will. And that must be the case if all we are is matter in motion. If matter in motion is the sole reality, there can be no free will. So exactly says John West in his book regarding astrology. Because if we are actually influenced by the stars, constellations, planets, or the planetary positions, if we're influenced that way and make decisions that way, then those influences are just like gravity working, and you cannot fight gravity. No more than you can argue against gravity. So there's really no free will if the astrological charts are correct or if the world of astrology is accurate. So I'm reminded of passages in the Bible which tells us, remember, God tells us for a beginning, Deuteronomy tells us, He said, beware, if you lift up your eyes to heavens and you see the sun, moon, and the stars, and all the constellations, and then He tells us that you want to be guided by them. He says, beware of drifting away. You're drawn away by them, and you bow down to them and serve them. Deuteronomy 4 and verse 19. That is basically what is astrology. It involves no free will. It involves occultist practices, seeking to find out secret things of the universe that God has not revealed. So there is astrology. So let's now take a notice of what is the history, for just a moment, of astrology. There are 2 basic areas that I want to explore. Number 1, evidence from secular history and evidence from the Bible. That is how the Bible testifies how ancient peoples have utilized, very broadly, astrological ideas in guiding their lives. Secular history, first of all. In the ancient world, that is, in what might be called the cradle of civilization, is the territory called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia simply means between the 2 rivers. Meso and the Potamia, 2 rivers. The 2 rivers are the Tigris and Euphrates River. And in that territory was the ancient civilizations such as the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian empires, and the Persian empires. That, of course, is the cradle of civilization because that is where man was first formed, evidently, according to the Genesis record. So in the ancient area of Mesopotamia, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Persians, we find all of them practiced astrology. For example, Ashurbanipal, who was an ancient Assyrian king reigning 650 years BC. In his library that has been discovered at Nineveh, there are over 70 tablets written in cuneiform writing that are astrological tablets in order to decide how to make certain decisions. It reminds us of what Ezekiel talks about when Nebuchadnezzar, the king, is marching down from the north. They came from the east, but they came up north and came down into Israel. And he said the king is there deciding which way to go, to the right hand or to the left. If he's going to go to the left hand, he's going to go on the Transjordan side. But if he chooses the right, he's coming down to Jerusalem. And what does he do? He splits the liver, and he opens the liver up. And the astrologers, that is people who are reading palms, read the veins on the liver and decide, we're going to Jerusalem. And that's how astrology or necromancy or divining takes place, actually more accurately divining. So ancient Babylonia, ancient Assyria practiced it widely. In the Neo-Babylonian Empire, they practiced astrology. Remember Daniel chapter 2, Daniel was taken as the cream of the Jewish crop, put into a school for the astrologers, the enchanters, and when he came out before Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel made clear, it's not the astrologies, it is not the necromancy, it is not the star charts, it's not stargazing, but it is the one God in heaven who has given me what I'm going to give you, the interpretation of the dream. That's Daniel chapter 2 and verse 2. So it was a widespread practice in ancient Mesopotamia. So also in Babylon, Persia, so forth. Here's some other areas where we find it also. The Greeks and Romans practiced astrology. There's an ancient Greek by the name of Berosus who took an astrological school, put it out over in the island of Kos, or Kos, C-O-S, in the Mediterranean, set up an astrological laboratory there. This is about the time Christ was born. Other ancient astrologers, we can find the record of them. There's so many multiple records of ancient astrological practices. There are also practices in the country of India, practices in the country of China. The Aztecs, the Mayans, all of them practiced astrology. But it is important to see what the Bible has to say regarding it. So let's turn our attention to what does the Bible teach, or evidence from the Bible regarding astrology. Let's notice, and we'll start with Job chapter 9 and verse 9. In the book of Job doing the speaking here in this particular text, Job 9, he says, who is it that stretches out the heavens? Who is it that made the Orion, it's a constellation, or the Pleiades, or the Bear? That is to say, Job is making a strike at astrology by pointing out that it is God who made these and set them in the heavens. Why would we think that these have an influence on human action? Clearer still is chapter 38 and verse 33. I call your attention to that passage. Job 38, verse 33. This is where God is answering Job. Now let's get the picture of what's taking place in the book of Job. Job is suffering, just seemingly immeasurably. He's lost everything that he's had, lost his health, lost his children, lost his possessions. And then his three friends, Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz, have come to him, supposedly to comfort him in his sorrows. And then they began discussing, debating, what was the cause of your suffering? And the one premise upon which all of them argued was that human suffering is caused by human sin. That is your personal human sin. You are suffering, Job, because you have sinned. And so the whole book is set up as a debate between Job and his friends. Bildad will speak, Zophar will speak, Eliphaz will speak. They later have another friend come in named Elihu. He will speak. At the end of it, by the way, Job also assumes the premise upon which they're operating, and that is that my suffering is caused by my personal sin. But he said, I have not sinned, therefore I think God is acting unjustly to me. So now God speaks out of the whirlwind and answers them in Job 38. This is a portion of his answer. He asked Job, can you bind the Pleiades? That is, do you have the chains of the Pleiades? The Pleiades is the Seven Sisters constellation in the middle of the constellation Taurus. Do you bind or do you break One translation has break the chains of the Pleiades. This is an interesting statement. That is to say that there is a chain or an attraction that they all have for one another, the stars in Pleiades. Do you know the modern Naval Observatory has discovered that there are about 250 stars in the star cluster called Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, and that they are all moving in concert with one another across the heavens, and that the reason that they stay together is because of the gravitational pull on one star and another star, and they're all moving. And here God asks the question, can you break the chain of the Pleiades? Now it becomes clear to us. Do you loose the bands of Orion? That is, can you move him in the sky? No. Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth with her children? What's the Mazzaroth? That's the signs of the zodiac, the constellations. Do you move the constellations? That is, there are 12 different constellations. Do you move them in the sky? The answer, of course, is no, you don't. Do you bring forth the bear with her children? The answer is no. Do you know the ordinances of the government of heaven? The answer again is no, you don't know. And can you establish their rule on the earth? But the implication is, I made them and I can. God controls all, not Job, and the stars do not control us. God says, I made them. I put them there. You can't touch one of those things, and you can't even explain them. Job 38, verse 33, what a powerful text. Then we have passages such as Amos chapter 5, and I want you to look at this one. This is Amos 5, 25 and 26, and we'll just read this together from Amos, because he makes a statement here that is quoted in the New Testament by Stephen in Acts chapter 7. Now I want you to listen to what he has to say. This is Amos 5, verse 25. Did you bring to me sacrifices and offerings during 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? You shall take up the Sikkuth, that is a tabernacle apparently, your king, and Kiyun, your star god. You took up Kiyun, your star god. Your text might have a footnote in it telling us what is Kiyun. But the idea of Kiyun, according to Ibn Ezra, an ancient Jewish translator, says that is the word Saturn. The Saturn. In other words, people of his day worshipped Saturn. But the most interesting portion of it is that this is quoted by Stephen in Acts 7, verses 41 through 43. And he says this, God gave them up to serve the stars of the heaven. And now he quotes this one, Amos 5 and verse 26, in which it is stated very plainly, you take up Kiyun, Saturn, your star god. And then he mentions the Baal worship that they had practiced in the wilderness. In other words, apparently Stephen is connecting Baal worship to star worship. Interesting, isn't it? But even clearer are these other texts. Let's notice those. One of them is 2 Kings 17. 2 Kings 17, and the verses are 16 and 17. This text describes what takes place in Ahaz's time. Ahaz, remember, a southern king in the southern kingdom. And in the city of Jerusalem, here's what it tells us regarding his apostasy. Verse 16, they abandoned the commandments of the Lord their God. They made for themselves metal images of 2 calves, and they made an Asherah and worshipped all the host of heaven and served the Baal. Notice that he connects serving Baal with worshiping the stars. But then clearer still is this passage, 2 Kings 23 and verse 5. In 2 Kings 23, Hezekiah, his son Josiah, has come to the throne, and Josiah eradicates the astrologers, the stargazers, all of these occult practices that had accumulated themselves around the religion of Israel. And listen to what the text reads, 2 Kings 23 and verse 5. He deposed the priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to make offerings in high places at the cities of Jerusalem and around Jerusalem. Those also who burned incense to Baal and the sun, moon, and the constellations. There's the same word. That is the signs of the zodiac. and all the host of the heavens, and he brought out the Asherah from the house of the Lord outside of Jerusalem to the brook Kidron, burned it in the brook Kidron, beat it to dust, and cast the dust of it into the graves of the common people. He broke down the houses of the male cult prostitutes who were in the house of the Lord. You can see immediately the kind of sins that accumulate around the astrological practices that have always been in history. These texts are clear what God says about astrology. But let's notice now more clearly, more pointedly, what does the Bible have to say? What is the biblical response to the practice of astrology? Number one, astrology denies the freedom of the human will. It denies the freedom of the human will because it tells us that just as the gravitational pull on the planets or the stars or the moon operates, so the gravitational pull or the influence of the stars influence your life. And just as the book by Anthony West I mentioned a moment ago tells us free will is an illusion, so also the evolutionist William Provine, as well as many other evolutionists, question the concept that we don't even have. They say we don't even have free will. The Bible, however, is very clear that we do. I like the way Brother James Bales, he was one of the great professors that was one of my mentors in the years past. He would say it this way: you are free to choose to do good or not good. You're free to obey the gospel or not obey the gospel. You're not free, however, to avoid the consequences of not obeying the gospel. There's some ways we're free, but there's some ways we're not free. Listen to what Joshua had to say as he went the way of all the earth. Joshua 24 and verse 15. As he stands up before Israel at the end of his life, having conquered all of the land of Israel, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods whom your fathers served who are beyond the river, speaking of Euphrates River, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's such a powerful text. That's one my wife has put right on the wall of the bedroom. She has written right on the walls. It's in script. Joshua 24, verse 15. Choose you this day whom you will serve. The Bible teaches we have perfect freedom of will to do or not to do, to obey or not to obey. Number two, astrology actually is a form of nature worship. According to Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, remember in the discussion that Paul has here of the apostasy of mankind away from God, he tells us in one line in verse 20, they worshiped and served the creature, that is what is created, rather than the Creator who is blessed forever. It is exactly so with astrology. Worshiping and serving, just as Deuteronomy tells us also, beware, 7 and 19, beware lest you lift up your eyes to heaven, you see the sun, moon, and the stars, and all of the constellations, and you bow down to them and serve them. Beware, because God has put them up for the benefit of all mankind. There is not any one astrological sign for any person or any culture that guides your life. They are there for the signs and the seasons according to Genesis chapter 1. So astrology is a form of nature worship. Number three, astrology limits the role of God in the world. How so? Let's go back to that passage in Job chapter 38 for just a moment. The question that, or the series of questions that God asks: can you break the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in its season, that is, the signs of the zodiac in the different seasons? Can you do this, Job? The answer is to all of these, no. No, he cannot. But the implication is, God says, I can, I am. Do you know the government, the ordinances of heaven? Can you establish their rule upon the earth? God tells us in the implication of the text, I can and I am. God is in control, not the stars, not astrological signs, not constellations, not the sun, moon, and planets, no matter where they are in their orbits. Number four, the belief in astrology paralyzes the human will. It paralyzes. Not only do they deny the freedom of the human will, but I want you to think about this. that those who are addicted to astrology or astrological charts or the signs of the zodiac, those who are addicted to these things, sooner or later lose, or it paralyzes, the freedom of their will. Listen to what Isaiah has to say in chapter 47, verse 13. Isaiah tells us plainly, chapter 47, tells us plainly that they are wearied. He said, aren't you wearied with the multitude of your counselors? Aren't you wearied with them? Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save you from the things that are coming upon you. Have no power to do so. But they were wearied with the multitude of the counselors. They turned to one and to another. And astrology participates in that same kind of idol worship. And it paralyzes a human will. Number 5. By the way, Lynn McMillan, from whom I've derived many of these notes, was a professor at Oklahoma Christian many years ago, writes a great book called Doctrines of Demons. And in this, he has a chapter on astrology, and he has some of these points drawn out very clearly. Lynn McMillan, Doctrines of Demons. Number 5, astrology is a form of polytheistic worship. Why is that? Because, as always carries on in the ancient world, they associated different gods with the constellations. That's exactly what was going on, for example, in Babylonia. When Daniel was taken to the school of the astrologers, they had Babylonian gods, false gods obviously, that were associated with the astrological practices. And that's exactly what takes place when we have astrology taking place in America. We are drifting into polytheism, the ancient polytheistic practices. Pretty sad, isn't it? And that astrology undermines genuine faith in God. My faith in God is God who controls the universe, God who answers the questions. God is the one who does all of these things. Job chapter 38, verse 33. That's the implication that he leaves there. I can. The whole point of the entire lesson is that astrology is, of course, a false religion, a quasi-religion, a false religion. But it should, in contemplation of it, drive us to worship the one true God of the universe. And just as Joshua said, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods whom your father served that are beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are, or, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. What is it going to be with America? That's what I want to know. With America, will we serve the Lord? It is the Lord who created all these things. It is the Lord who controls the universe. And it is not for us to probe into the secret things that belong only to God, Deuteronomy 29:29. He tells us and he warns us very plainly there that will become many people who want to probe into mysterious and hidden things. But he says, you have enough to do, just follow my word. Just do what I tell you to do. That's the message of Deuteronomy 29. He knew the Israelites wanted to go probe into the hidden things, the secret things of the universe, and that is what astrology is all about. But he said, you have enough to do, just do your duty before God. That's what we are to do today. So the lesson is for you. I want you to think about astrology compared to the Bible, and think about your own life. Have you given yourself to Christ Jesus the Lord by faith, repentance, baptism into Christ, Galatians 3:27, and leaning only on Him as the controller, not only the creator, but the controller of the entire universe? Come right now while we stand and sing if you're subject to the invitation.